We have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? None, so it's approved. Now is the time for citizen comments. And I was mentioning to some people earlier, since we have a smaller group than usual, they keep the agenda light, and so it can be a little less formal maybe. We had one speaker say that it was their first time, and we're a little nervous about it. So try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. And do we have a clock tonight or not?
We do. I will be the clock tonight.
There
I'll let you know
we
when
have
there's 30
the
seconds.
official clock. And just come up and give your name and address. And if we could start with the first person on the list.
Derek Wyckoff.
Is that good? Thank you. Derek Wyckoff, 7811 Northeast 205th Street, Kenmore, Washington. And I saw that the agenda was dealing with parking and street improvements and so forth, and some of the variances that have been permitted for our little brewing community. And I just, well, I don't know the whole aura of what's going on in that. I wanted to be here to check that out. But I did want to preface the meeting by saying that I very much appreciate living in a city and a community that has been so supportive of trying out these new businesses to see how it worked and to give us an opportunity to do that. While I don't appreciate, no offense, Ethan, all the competition that has brought to my backyard, I certainly do love living in Kenmore in a community that does give businesses an opportunity like that, and I'm sure Ethan would echo that. And I know Karen Brewing, who is actually eating at my place right now, would echo the same thing. So thank you to the City of Kenmore. Thank you to the Council for being supportive of new business, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. And if we could have the next speaker.
Ethan. I'm going to go ahead and have you say your last name. I don't. Yes. Okay, thank you.
Hello, I'm Ethan Savalio, Silent G, 3749 Southwest 99th Street, Seattle, Washington. I also am, I'm the owner and CFO of 9 Yards Brewing, henceforth Darren's competition, but we are also fostering a really, really great community of breweries and small businesses down there. And I know that on the agenda is the fee for the parking improvements and traffic impact. We are the one business that has opted into the pilot program, and so I'm very interested to see what the council is looking to do with that. It seems as if this pilot program may not have yielded the results that were expected, being as we are the one business that actually opted in. As a small business, we could use any revenue that we could maintain to grow our business, and I'm hoping that the council will reconsider this particular tactic of collecting the parking impact this way. We are supporting. We are going to do what we need to do to remain in good standing with this community and with this council. However, every dollar that we have, we can grow our business organically, create jobs and revenue. So I appreciate your consideration on this matter.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Laura.
Hello, I'm Laura Simbulin, 18325 83rd Place, Northeast Kenmore. I am speaking tonight in support of a business, Kenmore CrossFit, which is a small family-owned business, and it will be severely impacted by the road and impact fee. And my understanding that the impact would be so severe that it would cause the business to go out of business. Kenmore CrossFit has had a very big and positive impact on my life and on my family's life, and it would be an impact on my life if they went out of business due to the road and impact fee. So I would like the council to take into consideration the not only the impacts on their business, but the far-reaching impacts on the greater community and the health of the greater community. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councilor Curtis, we have one more person signing up.
All right.
Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay.
No problem.
What's your last name?
Brown.
Okay. You can just go to the podium.
Yes, ma'am, I will.
Okay. Christopher Brown.
Sorry, I'm late again. I'm actually, again, I'm here because the folks at Kenmore CrossFit.
Could you please give your name and address for the record?
Oh, okay. Christopher Brown, 17300 Northeast 91st Ave, A301. I'm here to talk about Kenmore CrossFit and the work they've been doing with. So I am a coach and board member of a local softball league, the North Broward Girls Slow Pitch Softball Association. We've been in a league for 47 years now. It's a big part of the Bothell, Kenmore, North Shore, that sort of community. And basically, as soon as Kenmore CrossFit came into town, they were actually willing to sponsor Kenmore schools. And the girls, they're actually the sponsor of our current Kenmore Middle School Frogs. And go Frogs. We'll do well, thanks. But when I heard that they were at risk of running out of Kenmore because of I understand traffic is a big concern there, and being run out of Kenmore for that, it makes me sad because the city of Kenmore needs businesses that do exactly what the guy Chuck at Kenmore CrossFit's been doing. Sponsoring local girls, sponsoring the community, being a big part of the Kenmore and the North Shore Girls softball community. And I would really like to see them stay here. And thanks, Chuck. Thanks for what he's done. That's all I got to say.
Thank you very much. Do we have anyone else who would like to speak?
Nobody else.
All right, thank you. We will end the citizen comment. So it sounds like the hot topic is related to our agenda item. So we'll all get more informed when we get to that spot on the agenda. Thank you for coming and speaking. It's really important to us to hear what our citizens have to say. That's how we make Kenmore a better place. And I believe little by little we are making a difference with our citizens' input. So next we... if I could get an approval for the consent agenda.
So moved.
All right. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. We have a approval and second for this agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None. So all in favor. So moving to the big topic of the evening. The
Your
business
Honor, can I interrupt for one quick moment?
Yes.
So it appears that the meeting is not live streaming. It's recording and everything and doing what it's supposed to, but we're getting feedback and from someone who's trying to live stream right now, and I just tried and I can't. Our city clerk tells me that if we pause the meeting for 2 minutes and let the system reboot, then it might be able to live stream. Would that be okay if we took a 2-minute break and let the system reboot?
Yes, that would be just fine. So we'll take a 2-minute recess.
Thank you.
Recess? Is that what we... Sure. I said, well, what did you do at school today? No, he must have been 6 because he had an all-day school. He said, well, we went and we did some stuff, and then we had recess. Then we did some stuff, and then we had lunch. Then we did some stuff, and then we had recess. And then we did some stuff, and then we came home. And so pretty much recess was the high point of first grade. So recesses are great. All right, so moving on to discussion on the temporary elimination of the road impact fee and minimum parking space requirements for changes of use of existing buildings in the north sub-area of the regional business zone, East 68th Northeast. And we have Samantha Loyick and Brian Hampson giving the presentation.
Good evening, council members. I'm Samantha Loyick. I'm an Associate Planner with Development Services, and as you mentioned, with me is Brian Hampson, Development Services Director. Tonight we bring before you Agenda Item A, a request for council direction and feedback regarding continuation of Ordinance Number 15-0398, known as the RB North Sub-Area Pilot Program. The pilot program was adopted by Council on July 27, 2015 to encourage economic development and reuse of buildings located along Northeast 175th Street and east of 68th Avenue. The program effectively encouraged new businesses by reducing on-site parking requirements and eliminating the traffic impact fee. The program was in effect for a period of 18 months and ended December 31st, 2016. As a condition, the program requires business owners who take advantage of it to pay the city $7,500 per year for up to 5 years. Funds generated from such payments are used by the city for parking-related programs, including enforcement. As mentioned during public comment, one business has taken advantage of this program. Without this program, the parking minimums and traffic impact fees would have made moving to Kenmore financially infeasible for this new business. The calculated traffic impact fee for this business, this example for 9 yards, would have been $269,971. So over $250,000. Because of the pilot program, the business owner was able to pay a yearly fee of $7,500 for up to 5 years. This yearly fee, even when calculated at the 5 years, only accounts for 14% of that original traffic impact fee. The program has been effective in encouraging new business growth and reuse of buildings along Northeast 175th Street. In addition, based on inquiries I've received at the permit counter from businesses interested in relocating to Kenmore, specifically 175th Street, Development Services anticipates a continued need for this program. With that, I will turn it over to Brian to summarize how the continuation of the pilot program will work and how we'll implement that based on your direction.
Thanks, Samantha. My name is Brian Hampson, Development Services Director. And based on what Samantha was saying, our recommendation would be to extend or continue this program through 2019. And another recommendation that we would have would be talking about the fee, the payment, the fee in lieu of. And so currently, as Samantha discussed, it's $7,500 a year, up to 5 years, unless one of the business owners can actually find parking available to them. And if they do, then they don't have to pay the rest of the fee. But our recommendation would be just to have a one-time one-time fee of $7,500 that we could use for traffic enforcement. It's our goal to have parking limited to the 175th to a certain amount of hours, and if we do that, we could have a police officer have traffic enforcement. I think it's important to point out that only one business took advantage of this in 2016. CrossFit is still eligible to take advantage of this. They made application on August 16th of 2016, and so if they want to, they could take advantage of the last year's ordinance without this year's ordinance even affecting them. But what that'll mean is if they can't come up with their parking requirements at the Kenmore CrossFit Center, then they would have to pay the $7,500 for up to 5 years. But as I understand it from talking to the business owner, the parking isn't necessarily a problem. They may have adequate parking, but he would definitely be able to take advantage of the traffic impact fee exemption. And as I also understand it, the CrossFit business owner would also need to pay, do frontage improvements along 175th. But this program, the last year program and this new program, doesn't include frontage improvements as an exemption. I think that's all we have. Do you have any questions?
Councilman Smith?
Yes, Brian, can you tell me, I know in the discussion, this moratorium addresses the traffic impact fees as well as the parking requirements. So the $7,500, is that for for both of them combined? What if, for instance, like let's take Kenmore CrossFit. So if they have adequate parking, which I don't know if they do or not, but if they do, but they would still pay the $7,500, the full amount, whether they had adequate parking or not, because that addresses the traffic impact fees?
So there's actually 3 prongs to this. One is a traffic impact fee, one is the parking regulations, and 3 is the frontage improvements. So the third one, frontage improvements, isn't part of either one of these ordinances. The traffic impact fee is a waiver or a credit that would be exempt from the traffic impact fee during this pilot program. So that's separate than the parking regulations. So if a business can meet their parking regulation requirements for the amount of parking spaces that they would need out of our code, our zoning code book, then they wouldn't have to take advantage of the parking regulation exemption. If they take advantage of the parking regulation exemption, there would be a fee in lieu of for us to use for addition to use for enforcement, and that would be $7,500 a year up to 5 years. And really what that is covering is the extra expense that somebody would have to pay in order to build adequate parking, which could be a structured parking garage or something of that nature.
Okay, so if I can just follow up, if you don't mind, because so if you meet the parking requirements, let's just say that you satisfy what the code would require, you can still pay the $7,500 a year for 5 years to eliminate the, say, frontage improvement? No?
No, they're all separate. So the frontage improvements, the parking requirements, and the impact fee are 3 complete separate things. So let's say that you meet the parking, the amount of parking stalls on your property, so you meet the parking requirements, and you don't have to do any frontage improvements, but you would have to pay an impact fee because of the change of use triggered more trips. Mm-hmm. The only thing you'd be eligible for an exemption is the traffic impact fee credit. So another example is, let's say that there wasn't new trips that were generated on your property, so you didn't have to pay new impact fees, but let's say you didn't have enough parking on your property. That way you could take advantage of the fee in lieu of and pay $7,500.
Okay.
3 completely separate topics.
But Brian, the frontage improvements don't have anything to do with the old ordinance or the new ordinance, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, the frontage improvements were never exempted in the old, in the ordinance that just sunsetted. If I can jump in, Your Honor, on the $7,500. So what we're recommending is that you pay a one-time $7,500 if you choose to readopt this ordinance. That would pay for not only for enforcement, but for other things like signage and striping and other issues to deal with potential congestion and parking and circulation problems in that area. Where did we come up with the $7,500? We don't have a strong scientific method of coming up with the $7,500. We estimated what enforcement and some signage and painting would cost us over a number of years, but it wasn't a super strong methodology in coming up with that number. Is that $7,500 something that we're really passionate about? No. You could, as a council, make that number 0 if you want. And I think that's all I have to say about that. I thought I had one more thought, but I guess I don't.
We'll give you another chance if it comes in.
Okay.
Councilmember Daniski.
Okay, I've kind of heard it both ways now. In the one that's coming up, is it $7,500 a year for 5 years, or $7,500 once and that's done?
So it's in the ordinance that just sunsetted, it was $7,500 a year for 5 years. For discussion purposes, we as staff are recommending, if you choose to continue this ordinance again, we're recommending that you change it from $7,500 a year for 5 years to just a one-time $7,500. But again, it's totally your choice. We're not wedded to the $7,500 number.
Okay. I guess I'm in favor of extending this. It's a pilot program. It's optional. I haven't heard any super negative feedback, although I know parking is tight over there, that this pilot program has ruined all the parking in the area. So I'm leaning for it.
Councilmember Hervey?
Okay, maybe I wasn't following something earlier, so I was trying to I thought maybe Councilmember Smith was getting to this, but I'm not sure if I heard the answer. So somebody has all the parking that they need, but they don't want to pay for the transportation, the trip.
Impact fee.
The impact fees, thank you. Does the $7,500 cover that or no?
No.
So the $7,500 only covers not having enough parking?
That's correct.
Okay, so you'd pay that, then you'd also pay the impact fees on top?
That's correct. But they would be exempt. If they take advantage of this ordinance,
okay, what does that mean?
They don't have to pay it. If we continue this ordinance.
Okay, that's what I thought I just asked, and you said they'd have to pay it. So so they pay the $7,500 even if they have the parking, and they're exempted from the impact fees.
That's correct.
Okay, that wasn't clear. Thank you.
Okay, so if they're looking for either or both exemptions, parking and impact fee, they're paying the $7,500 no matter what.
No.
Okay, so they're only paying the $7,500 if they need the parking exemption?
That's correct.
So how do they get out of the impact fees?
If we say yes to this ordinance.
Right.
Because there's two separate components. So the staff is going to look at parking, and they're
Okay.
going to say, is there sufficient parking? Yes, check, done. There's no payment. The next question is going to be, do they pay impact fees? Only if there is a ordinance that's been adopted that exempts them from payment. You currently have an ordinance that is no longer in effect. So right now, someone would have to pay those impact fees. If you go forward with the process to get a new ordinance in effect, then they would no longer have to pay those impact fees. So that's the second question. We're asking for direction from council whether we should go forward.
So the old ordinance had the impact fees as part of it.
Correct. And no
Okay.
parking.
And the $7,500 was covering both of those essentially?
No.
No.
They're
It was just
independent variables, totally.
Yeah, A and B, totally separate.
Okay, and there's no cost to the impact fees then, that waiver?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was...
I get you.
And then, Brian, a quick question too. So let's say we don't renew this. Let's say we sunset this. Not that I'm saying we should, but theoretically, if we were to do that and Kenmore CrossFit had to pay for the impact fees, had to get their own parking, had to do all of that, do you have any ballpark what the impact fees would be like for a business like that?
I didn't look into CrossFit's impact fee. Did you?
No, but they'd be exempt anyway because they're vested to their application date, so they were already under the old one.
Good point.
Okay, fair enough.
So, but a new business that would come in during this would be eligible. And then the example for 9 yards is that it was over $250,000
Right.
for the traffic impact.
I mean, it seems like we're saving businesses quite a bit of money by doing this instead of going through the full impact fee and possibly making them figure out their own parking situation. It sounds like we're saving the money over the long run rather than, or we're making it so people can actually locate there rather than having to jump through all the hoops of a change of use, which can be kind of onerous.
Right. You would still do the change of use, but this would be a, major relief to businesses.
Okay, thank you.
So I do still not quite understand why the staff is recommending the change from $7,500 per year for 5 years to $7,500 once. So $7,500 once, that averages $1,500 per year. You don't get many hours of police service at all. So either it's really not taking any police service at all, or we're underestimating the value of that service. So that I don't understand.
Do you mind if I
Jump right in?
That? So the $7,500 a year for 5 years, My fear was that was creating an expectation that we were going to take that money and build parking with it. And I want to manage that expectation. We're not. And if several businesses sign up for this, $7,500 a year for 5 years is probably more than what we need for all the parking enforcement and signage. But if you have several businesses sign up for $7,500 one time, and we just did some kind of spot check type enforcement, we weren't having police out there every day, but just several times a year. The rough math that we did covered that cost. And so that's another expectation I want to manage. If you adopt, say, $7,500 one time, I do not want to create the expectation that the cops are going to be out there every day. They won't. Maybe several times a year, at best. So for all the businesses that might take advantage of this, I do not want them to think that the cops are going to be out there constantly doing traffic enforcement, because they won't.
Have you gotten any feedback from anybody that there is that expectation?
No, but I always look ahead to see what expectations we might inadvertently create.
All right. So, Councilmember Smith, we'll go back around again.
Brian, I have a question. I don't know if this is something you're able to answer, but it's something that is sort of been in my mind when we started this this moratorium discussion, which I think, as if I recall, everybody was on the council was pretty enthusiastically in favor of it. And that has to do with the turnover of the property into a different use and redevelopment. And I think there's real value in having these businesses that we're talking about tonight and having use take place in these existing structures. I'm just curious, from your development side, do you see any advantage or disadvantage by implementing these policies and how they may impact the future redevelopment of these properties?
Well, I would see the change in use of this nature, where you're bringing in breweries and other small restaurants or establishments like this. It's going to start redevelopment and revitalization of that area. I think without it, this type of change, we would really be looking at continuing the existing uses that we see along 175th. And so I think that by doing this, we could actually be opening other opportunities for redevelopment or new businesses to come and build something similar to this. And I know that we're having small conversations with the property owner in this area for just that.
Okay. And I appreciate your thoughts on it, because I think if we can keep these structures occupied and kind of create a synergy that's already been created by the businesses there, I think it's kind of a unique district of Kenmore. It's an exciting feature.
Councilmember Herbert, did you have another comment or question? So, not that I'm saying we should go different than the way we're generally leaning, I can tell. We just have to keep in mind that if we've given away $269,000 of impact fees, that's money that came out of our citizens' pocket. And that's what city government does. They make decisions on how best to use the citizens' funds. And so as long as we keep that in mind, it's okay to do anything we want that encourages our city to grow. But we just always have to keep that in the back of our mind. If we don't take in the money that our zoning ordinances says that we would, then we say, okay, we think it's for a good cause to do that. So that was just a comment. It looks like we do not need an actual motion. Any other discussion before we end this topic?
Can I ask a question? Yeah, so we weren't expecting you to vote on this tonight, but for you to direct us to bring it back with any changes you might have. So my question for you is the fee, for example, are you okay with the one-time $7,500? Would you like to increase it, reduce it? Another question I have is, do you want to require that one-time fee up front, or would you be willing to entertain a payment plan for that. I know some of these businesses, $7,500 is a big check to write. So those are some policy questions I have for you before you tell us to bring it back.
How about if we start with Councilmember Danuski and we just go down the row and we'll give our thoughts on the fee?
I'm good with 7,500 once. I also had the expectation that we would be building parking if we did it once a year for 5 years. So taking that expectation down, I'm fine with doing it once, and I'm also good with a payment plan.
I'm good with the 7,500 and split it in 5 equal pieces.
I'm good with both. And I actually just remembered, though, a question I had earlier I forgot to ask. So you'd mentioned something about possibly looking at more timed parking out in that along 175th. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. There's lots of residences, too, though, on the south side of that street, folks that live there. We're going to have to be careful with how we balance that. We might be starting to get into a territory where we start looking at, resident permits or something. It's a discussion for down the road, but something we need to start thinking about.
Good point.
Yeah, I'm generally in favor of what we've discussed in the one-time fee, and this is only another moratorium, so it's not like we're creating a whole new ordinance that's going to live for years and years, and so I think it's well worth going another 18 months for.
I would just comment that is important. It really is just a temporary elimination of these 2 fees, and in 2019 we'll look at how the area is developing and make decisions based on that new information. So thank you very much for presenting to us.
You're welcome. With this, we'll bring it back to you, have additional public hearing. That will be part of it. We'll also have to do a SEPA analysis and get Commerce's approval, so it'll take us a couple months, but we'll get it back on the agenda.
All right. Thank you.
As soon as we can. Thanks.
Thank you.
And the next topic is vegetation and sidewalk maintenance plan with Brett Schock, our traffic engineer. Brett Schock and guests.
Good evening, council members. My name is Brett Schock. I'm the traffic engineer with the city. I have Jennifer Gordon, the operations manager, and Chris Overlease, the public works director, with me. And we're going to be entertaining a policy discussion about vegetation and sidewalk maintenance. So just a outline of our agenda here. We'll be identifying the policy issue for both of these categories. So we'll have kind of 2 separate discussions here, one on vegetation and then one on sidewalks. I'll go through very briefly the existing code requirements that we have in the city and a review of what we are currently doing in both of these categories. I took a look at the code requirements of some neighboring cities, Bothell, Kirkland, and Shoreline, just to see how both our existing code and the recommendations that we have for changes to the code compare to those neighboring cities. And then I'll present some recommendations from staff, and then we'll be looking to get your feedback on these discussions and recommendations. We're not looking for any decisions tonight, so similar to the last topic. We will come back with any changes to the code to the council for further discussion. So we'll touch on vegetation maintenance first. And I want to stress that this is vegetation maintenance in the improved public right-of-way. This does not apply to unimproved right-of-way or any city-owned parcels. So vegetation maintenance in that right-of-way is important for site distance, driveways and cross streets. There's a number of places along Simons Road you might be familiar with. I see some pictures here where the site distance isn't great because of some vegetation. It's important to maintain clear pedestrian walkways, whether that's sidewalks or just walkways behind the curb or sometimes on the shoulder that are marked off as walkways. To keep our bicycle lanes clear as we start to add more of those. To maintain our functional drainage facilities and aesthetics along our arterials. So the existing code actually has 3 different sections that discuss vegetation maintenance. One of those sections has an interesting little drawing that really outlines what the site distance requirements are for a new driveway or a new intersection. We also have a section that defines what a planter strip is, and it's a little vague. The sketch you see there is from our new roadway standards, which is kind of what we're moving to for a planter strip. But the picture on the right, everything from the edge of pavement there to the actual the line of the property line there is considered the planter strip as well, according to the code. And then we have a third section which discusses just the need to keep sidewalks clear. So the responsibility for both performance of vegetation maintenance and the cost of it is on the adjacent property owner. In the case where there was a denial by the property owner to do the vegetation maintenance, the city could do that trimming, and then council would need to approve assessment of those costs to the property owners. I believe that's not been done recently.
That's correct.
Okay. But that is an option that is in the code. So our current practices, we have a very reactive program. If we get a citizen complaint that comes in, someone will go out in the field and take a look at that. Or if someone's in the field and just notices that there's an issue with vegetation growing over a sidewalk, we'll send a letter to the property owner of record, giving them 30 days notice to address the vegetation issue. You can see an example of one of those that I sent below. I just take a photograph and show them where there's an issue, just so that there's a lot more clarity on what we're actually expecting. But then they have 30 days to comply with that. After the 30 days, at least code-wise, that's where we would get into a situation where we might perform the trimming and then bill the property owner. Any immediate safety hazards are addressed by the city, typically on arterials. And then we do some trimming for aesthetics on the arterials at the city manager's discretion. And then if we have signs that are not visible due to vegetation growing over top of them, or something falls in a storm in front of it, then that's the operations manager's discretion to do that trimming. So the adjacent cities, Shoreline their code does not actually reference vegetation on its own. It's considered as part of their sidewalk maintenance. That vegetation is considered a blockage of sidewalks, and they require property owners to maintain the sidewalks in a passable state. Kirkland speaks to removal of vegetation which impairs the public use of sidewalks and streets. They also have layered on top of that code an ordinance that was pretty intricate to define the assessment and collection of fines for noncompliance. And then Bothell has a very prescriptive rectangle that must be this high and this far off the pavement, that must be kept clear for sidewalks and traveled ways. So that would include things that are traveled by vehicles or bikes. So for vegetation maintenance, the staff recommendation is to maintain our reactive program of maintenance. The responsibility should remain with the adjacent property owners. We'd like to clarify the code language, defining the limits of responsibility and the expectations. As I mentioned, the planter strip definition is kind of vague, especially considering the actual conditions on the ground that we have at a lot of our properties. You can see a picture and diagram I sent recently to a property owner just to really lay out, this is the line we need it behind, this is how high we need. And we also would like to streamline the code requirements for assessing cost of removal at the city's expense, just to be more in line with our neighboring properties, but also to make that a little easier on us if we get into that situation. So we're looking for your feedback on that responsibility for maintenance, whether we take it on as the city or keep it with the adjacent property owners, whether we want to go to a proactive program of vegetation maintenance versus our existing reactive, any thoughts on defining the limits of responsibility and the assessment of costs for city maintenance.
Now, would it be okay with you if we discuss vegetation first, then we'll have the presentation on the sidewalks?
Yes, please.
All right. So we're open for comments or questions from the council on the vegetation issue.
I'm pretty much fine with what we've got here. So we're proactive more on the arterials and reactive more on side streets is what I'm saying, what I'm seeing us
Generally,
do.
yeah.
I think we just have to keep a good eye on bike lanes and be maybe a little bit more proactive where we've got bike lanes, because now we've got people close to the edge where we may not have before. And then I just tossing around in my mind, did you ever think of if you were going to assess a bill to a property owner, their income level at all and their ability to pay in that?
That hasn't come up. I mean, at this point in the 8 years that I've been here,
it's never been an issue.
We've never charged a property owner.
Okay. So maybe that's something, if we are going to actually start charging property owners, we might want to think about their ability to pay and possibly.
May I ask the council, legal counsel, would that be acceptable for us to have a rule that only applies, or a law that only applies based on people's ability to pay?
So there's several chapters in the RCW which identify the process for cost allocation. I would want to look at that to there's sometimes factors to be able to differentiate between low income versus the general population. I've never seen that done.
Okay.
And I'm not saying it can't, but I'd like to look at it a little bit closer for taking out a group of people.
Okay. I'm not saying we necessarily need to, but I was curious.
And may I add that in the past 5 years, I can think of just one circumstance where, we asked a property owner to maintain a hedge for sight distance by a school, and the property owner refused. And so Jennifer's crews went out and did that maintenance. One, if we're going to go do the work, we control what it looks like. We're going to go and, whack the heck out of hedges to push them way back so we don't have to go back and do them in the future. So when we do that work, we are doing the work not for aesthetics, but for sight distance and safety. So that's one disincentive, that would encourage property owners to do it. We're not talking high cost, for the crews to go out for a couple of hours to take care of some vegetation. I don't see that we're looking at real high cost items.
Okay, thank
And
you.
honestly, vegetation is not
Pretty darn cheap.
really a problem.
Okay.
I mean, most people comply.
We'll just do it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Your Honor, if I may, there was one instance a few years back where there was a elderly woman in her 80s or something, and she was on very limited income, and she needed to trim a pretty big hedge. Do you guys remember this? It's not ringing a bell.
Are you talking?
Yeah. But
Do you know
what I
give me the
remember
street, I can-
happening is that the neighbors came to her rescue and helped her out. You're nodding your head. Do you
I
remember
do
this?
remember that.
Okay.
That was in relation to a speed study we were doing in a neighborhood. And we also identified as part of the big picture look some vegetation that needed. And we had an in-the-field meeting with the neighbors, and it came up that work needing to be done, and the neighbors offered to do it, which was great.
So that kind of a community approach is something we might be able to tap into.
Councilmember Herbig?
I just want to say I think I agree with staff's recommendation to kind of keep this on the property owner's plate. And I appreciate the work that's going to go into kind of clarifying exactly what the responsibility is for folks. So I think the clearer we can be with that, the better results we're going to get from property owners. So I think this is a good direction.
Can I make one more clarification?
Yes.
Could you go back to current city practices slide? So there is some discretion that we have that I would recommend that we continue to have, especially when it comes to arterials. For example, take 61st Avenue, for example. You have these big retaining walls with all this grass that needs to be mowed. And the adjacent property owner lives several blocks driving away up above on top of the retaining wall. So to expect the property owner to come down and walk their lawnmower around several blocks to get that little strip mowed is unreasonable. Also, there's a lot of houses where their backyard fence is on the arterial, and so getting them to come around the block and mow. Also, arterials in general, that's kind of the first impression of our city, and I think it makes sense for us to put resources into keeping the arterials looking nice.
All right. Any other comments on this one? If not, let's move on to the sidewalks.
Okay. All right. So sidewalk maintenance is in the public right-of-way is necessary to maintain those walkways. Consistency of the sidewalks is important, and the cause of damage is something that we need to be considering in determining the responsibility. This is a picture of 61st Avenue, and those trees that are on the roadside of the sidewalks there were not planted by those property owners. So that's kind of where I'm going with that. The current code requires the Public Works Department to identify sidewalks that are in need of repair and then notify property owners of the need to repair and assign those costs to the property owners. But again, council approval is necessary to assess those costs to the property owners. Jennifer and I discussed earlier that we've had some situations where either multifamily housing or commercial properties have successfully been pursued for sidewalk maintenance, but there hasn't been a private residence that we've had that situation. So current city practices, again, it's a reactive program. If we get a citizen action request or the neighborhood transportation plan that happened last year, we got some comments about some sidewalks that were in need of repair. We also did a sidewalk inventory in 2015, which was focused more on our ADA ramps and our accessibility. But as we had some interns out there, they kind of took note of the condition of the sidewalks and if we had any issues that needed to be repaired. So the RCW does authorize the city to repair sidewalks and assess those costs or use city funds. The pictures you see here are of the 61st Avenue sidewalks, the voids that opened up south of 190th that were repaired. I believe it was 2 summers ago that occurred. So that's just an example of, that's the adjacent property owners to those are kind of what Rob was discussing earlier. They're up, blocks away. But this was an issue that was not necessarily due to their control. So the city took on the cost and responsibility of doing those repairs. So outside of the city, Shoreline also assigns the cost and responsibility for sidewalk maintenance to the adjacent property owners. In Kirkland, the adjacent property owners are responsible for damage that's caused from actions on the private property. So that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, about assessing whether this is something that happened on the city side or that the trees that were planted in the public right-of-way or whether it was a tree that was planted on the private side. So they do have that discretion before assigning the cost to the property owner. Bothell is similar to our existing code in that property owners are just responsible for sidewalk maintenance. So the staff recommendation for this one is actually to transfer the responsibility for the sidewalk maintenance to the city. This is to maintain conformity and help to ensure safety. It will carry an increased cost, whether that's just taking care of things in a reactive program or an even higher cost would be a proactive program of getting out there and assessing ahead of time. We'd also like to revise the code to allow the identification of the source of damage, whether it's on private or public, before assigning those costs to a property owner. Again, for some feedback, proactive versus a reactive program. Proactive program is obviously going to require a lot of additional resources. If council does recommend going to that, it's something that we would tie into our public works service analysis that's upcoming. Get your thoughts on assessment of the cause of damage prior to assignment of costs, and then assessment of costs for maintenance if the damage is on or is due to private property.
All right, open for comment or questions. So Councilmember Herbie.
So I grew up in Seattle. My parents had a sidewalk in front of their place, and it got buckled by a cherry tree, and they had to pay for it, and that made sense to me at the time. But the more I think about this, and the more that I think we're kind of normalizing the expectation that people can get around Kenmore in more than just their car by themselves. We're trying to make this city more pedestrian-friendly, more bicycle-friendly. And I think a really important part of that is the sidewalks, as we saw in the Walkways and Waterways ballot measure last year. This is something people want, and this is an investment that benefits everybody. So I think the city taking on that responsibility makes a lot of sense to me, unless somebody does something, that causes the damage from their property. But I think it makes a lot of sense for us to treat it like we would any other right-of-way. If we had a street out there that had a pothole, we wouldn't wait for somebody to complain about it. We would go out and fix it if we came across it. We look at our road, our pavement assessment every couple of years, and we go through and we look at every single segment of street and evaluate how that's doing, and then build our overlay program off of that. I think with the investments we're going to be making in sidewalks in the next couple of years, it makes sense for us to be proactive with the sidewalks and to be proactively, same way that we fund the overlay program, be proactive with funding fixes and funding keeping our sidewalks up after we get them built, not just treat them as a one-time capital cost, but really factoring in the long-term maintenance costs. And kind of staying on top of it to keep them as usable as possible for as long as possible, rather than waiting for a kid to trip or somebody not being able to navigate because of a route issue. So I think it's time for us to step up our game a bit and be proactive with this. Thank you.
Councilmember Tedeschi.
I agree with the staff recommendation of us doing most of the maintenance on the sidewalks.
Councilmember Smith.
Do we have any estimate on, by us taking over this, what we're looking at for cost? It says increased cost, but can you give me an idea of what we're talking about increased cost?
I think we're just talking about setting aside a pot of money and whatever, you guys decide that seems a reasonable amount of money. But I think it's going to involve multiple, forms of maintenance. We're going to be looking at, concrete cutting, grinding, replacing panels. So, we're going to be going into it with a couple different tools in our toolbox, not just, we're going to rip it all up and redo it all. So I think we want to be creative in how we approach the repairs.
And I know we can get funding sometimes for grants on gaps and stuff in sidewalks. Is there any type of maintenance granting that goes on out there?
Not that I'm aware of. And I want to emphasize what Jennifer said is my vision is that we establish a pot of resources annually, and we start and using that toolbox, just trying to make headway. I think when you look at something like a 61st Avenue, that's in our CIP for, looking at the whole stretch north of 190th to see what we need to do. So I think what we're recommending is maybe a pot of money annually, maybe it's $50,000, where we can do a lot of work and make a lot of corridors much improved. But when we're looking at something like a 61st or a corridor that really has trouble, then we are going to get into capital improvement project territory. We're just, grinding and panel replacement isn't going to do it.
So are we, by changing the whole thing, by taking responsibility and being proactive, are we assuming any other greater liability on this? If let's just say your pot of gold of $50,000 isn't enough, and we know we've got $250,000 worth of work, does that create a problem where all of a sudden then we can't proceed like we normally would, or does that change that procedure at all?
My understanding is the liability has been ours.
Okay.
Because we've chosen the way the code reads. We would go out and ask property owners to do the work. So I think it's not a shift of liability. I think it's been ours.
Okay. And then just one last question on your, because it gives the city manager's office the ability to assess the property owner if they've caused the problem. Do you have, is that common? Is that common that when you see we have sidewalk problems, if you were to throw a rough percentage out, which are actually, what percentage of these problems are caused by the property owner versus the city, or just the normal wear and tear on a sidewalk?
I don't know if I could give a number. I mean, like 61st, for example, I mean, those sidewalks are kind of beyond any kind of maintenance out there, and those trees were planted, you know, in the right-of-way when those homes were developed or when that sidewalk was developed by King County. And now we're kind of, you know, stuck with the result of that. You know, there's other places, I know the county's planted trees, maybe on the back of sidewalk, and I only know that because these little things have come up over the years. But it's kind of difficult to say sometimes, you know, is the property owner, you know, it's got to be really obvious. And the ones that we've been really successful to get voluntary compliance, it's very obvious. It's very obvious that the tree is clearly on private property side and is buckling up the sidewalks. I mean, you know, I don't think we're going to get into something that we're going to argue back and forth that, oh, could this be that tree? Could this be that tree? I think we're going to look at ones that are very obvious.
And that's actually where I was going. I just want us to be really clear, so when we do assess a property owner, it's very clear what the procedure is and why they're being assessed that, because you know, they may look across the street and say, how come you fix theirs? I just want us to be able to make sure we've covered our bases on having a clear policy.
And once you've decided to fix a panel or a small area of sidewalk, the minute you lift up get the concrete out of there, it's pretty clear typically where the roots are coming from.
Okay, thank you. I'm fine with this.
So, so if I just understand the three, to request for council feedback, the three items, the first one is really to develop a maintenance program where we don't do all the work. So we're not agreeing to do all the work. We're just going to survey everything, right? So the bullet number one is not that we're taking responsibility. We're just saying we're going to, let's see, I'm looking at the agenda, not the presentation. So it says direct the city manager to develop a program to proactively identify sidewalks in need of repair. So it doesn't say we're taking responsibility to pay for it. We're just taking responsibility to develop this proactive identification. Is that correct?
I think we have a pretty good inventory of our sidewalks and their condition from the ADA work that we did a couple years ago. I think one of the main things we want to know tonight is, do we want to keep doing what we're doing, which is our code says private property owners are responsible for the sidewalk adjacent to their property, or do we want to get rid of that code language and then the city would be responsible for sidewalk repair?
So it sounds like that's where my confusion is coming from. So it sounds like if you look at the three questions, the second one is direct the city manager to develop a policy to identify the cause, and then number three would be to be able to pass those costs on. So it seems like if we chose as a council to say we're going to be responsible for sidewalks, then 2 and 3 become irrelevant.
Yes, they're questions to consider.
Okay. Because one thing, as I was thinking about this, it sort of made a difference to me if it looks like it's one person specifically, their property. If you looked at 10 property owners in a row, and you said, generally this sidewalk's in pretty good shape, and this one property owner has 3 big trees that's totally destroying this one little piece, then clearly that owner is doing something different than the normal maintenance wear and tear that you'd expect on a sidewalk. So 61st, it's a disaster pretty much the whole distance. So it's worn out. It's been there enough years, and it's run its life, and who's responsible to replace that? There, I'm comfortable the city taking that on. But if there's one property owner whose property and trees, or let's say they have a stream on their property and it washes out underneath, and it's specific on their property and the rest is fine, I don't have any problem expecting the property owner to take responsibility. So is that workable or non-workable to sort of say, comparing one property to those around them and say, is it general deterioration, city takes responsibility like you're recommending, or one property, it's a one-off, theirs looks destroyed compared to everybody else that's fine? What do you think?
I think that's what we're recommending.
Yeah, that would be the assessment portion.
But I guess now I am confused. I thought we were talking about if the city takes responsibility, then number 2 and 3 become irrelevant.
Well, I think we're saying we're going to take responsibility depending on the cause. If we can positively identify a property owner the cause of the damage, then we would assess the property owner.
Okay.
Which I think will be rare.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
Just the last thing. So is this something we won't discuss again on the financial impacts until budget time in the fall? So.
Yeah, so the idea is for you to have discretion to budget what you see fit annually towards this.
Okay. Thank you.
So it sounds like we have enough survey information to get sort of an idea like how many panels or how many stretches might need kind of more immediate work over the next 2 years, for instance.
Yeah.
So that would be available at the time we're doing our budget.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments on this one? So it sounds like there's general improvement to go this direction, that the city will take more responsibility, it sounds like, than our neighbors. And unless there's a specific property causing something that's outside the ordinary compared to the neighbors, then we would ask them to pay for it if we can prove that they're responsible.
Yes.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Thank
May
you.
I ask a quick question? Could we have Brett talk about next steps really quick? Since we broke them into 2 conversations, we didn't kind of put a bow on it. So
Yeah.
Go for the bow.
What's next, Brett?
All right, so we'll incorporate your feedback from tonight and start to work on some actual code updates, which we would bring for discussion and public hearing. And then we'll finalize those modifications and adopt those codes at a future meeting.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and the next item for discussion is the city construction manager position. Chris Overlease, Public Works Director, will stay on site.
I'm back, but to a different microphone. Well, good evening. I'm here with Kent Vaughn, one of our senior engineers and capital project managers, and we won't dig into that spreadsheet quite yet. But the reason we are here is we are recommending that we hire a permanent construction manager in-house here at the city. And the story and kind of how it all came about, we were wrapping up the 522 project, and Kent said, we continue to spend significant resources for construction management with our consulting firms that we use. And, maybe we should consider and look at our capital improvement program to see if it's time that we thought about bringing that, a construction management position in-house. So Kent and I bounced it off the city manager, and he said, go for it, look at the numbers and see what the story that the numbers tell. And just for a frame of reference, so on the 522 project, we had a construction manager, we had an office engineer, we had a documentation specialist, and we had about 2 inspectors. So that's not typical of all the projects we do, but we have some pretty big projects heading our way. So what Kent did is he, and we worked with Debbie to look at parks projects. So we looked at parks projects, surface water projects, and transportation projects, and we laid them out, and we evaluated the types of resources that would be needed for the whole capital improvement program over the next 6 years. What we were wanting to see is if we could if we had at least 1 FTE for construction manager that whole time. Now, so just to back up, we currently do most projects where we hire a construction manager. It would take a pretty small sidewalk project to do that construction management in-house. We did the Log Boom pedestrian bridge. Zach managed construction of that. He's going to be managing construction of the Tolt Trail, and then the piece of sidewalk by Murphy's. We actually did that in-house as well. But the 522, the 181st sidewalk, we use construction management help for those projects. So and I also want to say, using consultants to do construction management works great for us. So nothing's broken. What we're doing works really well. We find qualified construction management folks to manage our projects for us as needed. We use multiple different consulting firms for that work. So there's nothing wrong with what we're doing, but we do spend significant resources when we hire consultants to do that work. So the first thing, actually I'll let Kent run through the numbers, but what we really were looking at a couple of things. One, did we project kind of a permanent, from here on out, at least one FTE, full-time employee for construction management for all of our CIP, surface water, parks, and transportation. And assuming that we paid that person at the senior engineering level rate, which I think is reasonable for high-level estimating, what would that look like in cost savings for us? So that's what Kent spent quite a bit of time doing, and he'll walk you through that.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So you see the graph in the display here. So we went through the 6-year CIP for surface water, parks, transportation, and estimated the hours that a construction manager would be needed for each one of those projects, and then laid them out as the delivery schedule for the CIP. And as you can see, there's a need for one FTE in several years. There's more than one FTE need. The 2020 year, you could see where that's the walkways and waterways, where we have the bridge, 68th Avenue, and wanting to drive potentially being under construction at the same time. We're really looking to get the design and right away for those projects done a little sooner, so the spike may happen in 2019 versus 2020. So basically, we went through analysis to determine if there's a need, and yes, there is a need. And then the analysis was, well, how much money would we save if we hired somebody in-house? So we went and looked through 3 different scenarios, comparing what a city staff person would cost versus a consultant. And we went through 3 scenarios. One scenario would be, what if this person is 100% busy doing construction management work? What would the savings to the city be? And you can see from the top table, basically, it's around $130,000 to $150,000. There's several assumptions in there, escalation, benefits, but roughly it's a pretty good savings if they're 100% working on construction management type work. The next scenario that we looked at is, well, what if this person was managing projects and also inspecting them? So say they're half-time, they were doing construction management level work, and the other half they were inspecting the work. The savings go down on an annual basis, but roughly it's a pretty significant savings of close to $100,000. And then for a very conservative analysis, what would happen if this person that was paid as a construction manager, but all they did was inspection work for us? The annual savings is still $50,000 a year. So this analysis basically determines that there's a need for an FTE and that there's potential savings if we create a position for that in-house.
I probably should have outlined in greater detail what a construction manager does. Can you talk about construction management versus inspection?
Construction managers basically manage the day-to-day operations in projects, manage issues in the field, manage the staff. You know, the inspectors are the point person between the city and the consultant, and work out a lot of, issues that can come up, manage change orders,
a lot of the high-level type stuff.
So managing federal aid.
Yeah, knowing federal aid and what documentation is needed. There's a laundry list of things that you need to do out in the field to make sure that you're complying with federal regulations.
Utility coordination, working with staff, communications with businesses. So construction management is more detailed. So what an inspector would do, and we had 2 inspectors on 522, is they're out there all day observing the work and documenting the work. So they're tracking labor, equipment, materials. They're making sure materials testing is done. So when we're talking about construction manager, we do have a need for that higher level or that level of staff person. They also do constructability reviews. So usually what happens on a 522 project, we bring the construction management team in early during design to look at it for constructability. We would be able to do that in-house, which would be really, really great.
And the FTE for each project was basically determined. We estimated what the working days for each project would be and the hours that a construction manager would be working on that project, and also added some time for them to get familiarized with the project before it actually went under construction, roughly a month, and a couple of months afterwards their involvement would be in project closeout, and basically taking that estimated hours and divide it by 2,080, which is a full-time employee.
So we think the work exists. I do want to highlight that the cost savings we might experience, we think these numbers are very conservative. We think they're good numbers. I like how Kent looked at if they're all construction manager, if they're half-time construction inspection, or we're even saving money if we pay at a city construction management level, but have them do inspection work, which is great. Depending on the project we have them work on, will dictate who gets the savings. So it's a savings overall, but if it's a grant-funded project, we may see some of the savings. The grant may see some of the savings. So that'll be part of being strategic. Should we go this route, is what projects they're working on and how they get paid for. So say, for example, the West Sammamish River Bridge was mostly funded by grants. We're hiring so many construction management people for that project, it may not make sense to put them there. 1, because it's mostly consultants anyways, and 2, hopefully grants will pay for most of that work. So maybe we choose to use a construction management person on a surface water project and a Great Parks project, which are city funded. So that would be part of the strategy on the work that they do. And I really want to stress that we're not interested as staff in this position unless we can find someone really great. So our recommendation is we do proceed to see if we can find a construction manager in-house. But if we cast the net, as we say, and don't find a really, really good fit, we wouldn't want to do it. We would keep doing business as we have. I think that's all we've got as far as background and recommendation.
All right.
So we're not asking for a decision tonight. We would come back later.
Any questions or comments from the council? Councilmember Smith?
Excuse me. First, I really appreciate the spreadsheet and the work that you went into just laying some of that out. Obviously, those numbers are always disappointing to see just how big they are. But the good part is you explained it well, and I appreciate that. Do you lose anything in specialized, like efficiencies from if you have different, whether it's surface water management or it's parks plan, where we typically work with a consultant that specializes in that, is there anything that's lost when you get somebody that is more of a jack of all trades?
I usually see more specialty in inspectors. So, for example, on the 522 project, we had a wall specialist. Sometimes you might see folks that are really, underground utility. That's been their focus. So I've seen more specialty in inspections, but not necessarily in construction management.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yeah, I'm in favor of this. You demonstrated the need. You demonstrated the savings. We're not going to be laying them off in 3 years, so I'm in favor of it, especially if we get somebody really good.
Really good.
Councilmember Herbig?
I think this is great. You guys have put a lot of thought into this, and the delta is really compelling if we can find the right person. So I'm fully in support.
Yeah, I like what this represents, the creativity and the staff saying not just, business as usual, say, how can we do our business and maybe even save some money to boot? So great. Thank you for that work.
Can I throw one thing out? So let's say 2 years from now, the economy just tanks and we go into just another horrible, great recession. But what if the funding for the capital projects stays in place? So the walkways and waterways money, grant money, and we have enough capital money to keep this person busy. Will there be but let's say we had to make cuts in other operating areas. So would there be a perceived disconnect that, okay, we just added this position and we might have to make cuts in other areas, but we're keeping this brand new position that we just added. I can just, unless you understand where pots of money come from, then you may look at this and go, what in the heck is the city doing keeping this brand new position that they just added? So why do I bring this up? Because I've seen that happen before. So anyway, I just throw that out there. I don't know if it's worth discussing, but it's something I bring up.
One thing Rob has mentioned to us many times is, we program the money for this work within each capital improvement project. So right now we budget these projects as if we're hiring consultants to do this work. So Rob has told us multiple times that this is a position that capital projects will pay for. This is not to have more money come from somewhere else.
Yeah, this is not to touch the general fund, for example.
I think as much as we're used to thinking in little funds for little pieces and you can't spend it somewhere else, I think it'd be a pretty easy thing to explain to staff, or probably easier to staff, harder to the citizens, because I think it's a little more confusing for them why you can be cutting back in one area and doing something in another. But I think we do that all the time. So.
And when economies tank, we already have grants in hand. So my experience has been when things get lean, it's cities like ours that still have our capital improvement programs because we secured the money years before. So
maybe asphalt will be cheaper or something.
Yeah, it's true. Even if things get tight, we will have a very healthy capital improvement program. And surface water funding is more steady, and so we will always have surface water projects as well.
All right, Councilman Smith.
I would just like to add, I think one of the things for me is I know what we have on our capital improvement plan, and we've got a lot over the next few years. And actually, if the economy tanked, that might not even be a bad thing from the standpoint that maybe the bids would come in lower. And who knows, you may get some efficiencies there. But I actually am really confident with the walkways and waterways and with our parks plan and the transportation issues we're doing. I think this makes sense, so I'm comfortable with it.
Do you need any specific timing or recommendation from us?
No, I'm hearing that you're supportive of the idea, so we will do a little more research and then come back and ask for official okay to create the position. We wanted to see what you thought before we invested the time of creating a written job description, and we probably have to do some market surveys as far as skills and cost, but we think by us doing our estimates with the senior engineer position that they were good estimates.
All right. Thank you very much.
I was going to add one thing with the consultant hourly rate. It was based off of an overhead of roughly 130, and the fee of 30. So roughly, it's a low overhead. So other consultants may have higher. So the savings could be actually greater, depending on who's actually the consultant. So.
We'll probably come back and put this on a future consent agenda, if that's okay.
All right. Thank you. Sounds perfect. All right. Thank you for that presentation. And moving to staff reports.
Yes, I have several things. I accidentally printed this out on 11 by 17. but this is the Hiram M. Chittenden Locks report. The city actually helped pay for this report. We believe that the lake cities like Kenmore benefit from well-functioning Ballard locks. And so we chipped in $1,000 to help pay for this study. And so the draft of it is out, and I forwarded it to you. And to, in my effort to save a tree, I'm not giving you hard copies, but I did find it in my ability to print out a big giant copy of it. So anyway, so the comments are due March 17th on this draft. I've looked through it. I haven't read every word, but I've zeroed in on what I saw were the important parts, and they do make a really good case for the positive impacts that these Ballard locks have on the lake cities and the region as a whole, both economic and otherwise. And then it talks about the deficiencies in the locks and how they need to be funded, because unplanned closures of unmaintained locks would be really, really bad. So that's the main gist of this. If you have any comments, feel free to get them to me. And they're looking for comments on this by Friday. Also, last week, the Dean Widener team, who is the potential developer at Lake Point, had what they call a plussing session. This was their meeting. But it was a day and a half, an evening, and then a full day. And they called it a plussing session, also known as a leapfrog session, also known as visioning. But the idea was to really generate some ideas on what a future Lake Point project could look like, and what kind of compelling story would come out of that would meet the needs of our community and our region. So there were some really smart people in the room brought in by Widener to help with this. And it was a very productive session, and a lot of great ideas that came out of that, including some ideas that we brought to the table, including a Dutch Hoven ring. So, and that term got thrown around quite a bit during the session. So if you, rather than me try to describe it, just Google it. You could write Netherlands and Hoven ring, all one word, and you'll see what we mean. So some other really creative ideas came out. One big idea that came out for me was that Lake Point could be a project that has an iconic physical feature, like our version of the Space Needle, or our version of the High Line in New York City. Some really cool feature that we become known for. So that was one of the takeaways, at least for me anyway. Like I said, this was not our meeting, it was Widener's meeting. Several of us were invited to it, including a couple of council members. The idea is for the facilitators of this to take all these ideas and write a compelling story for what a future Lake Point could look like. What we'd like to do is have the Widener team come to a future city council meeting, possibly in April. And right now we're looking at Wednesday, April 19th at 6:30 p.m. So if you don't have to tell me now, but if you could look at your calendars and tell me what you think. And thought we'd take a couple of hours with the Widener team where they can give you an update on the project, where they're at with milestones in the CSDP extension agreement, and also a kind of high-level summary of what came out of the plussing session. So again, I'll send you an email, but it's April 19th at 6:30 p.m. is what we're looking at. Also, I have on your council dais a letter from several mayors. They're encouraging us to participate in Affordable Housing Week, which is the week of May 15th through the 22nd. And given the priorities and resources you've put into this topic, I recommend that we participate. So at the April 24th City Council meeting, you could have a proclamation that you adopt declaring this week as Affordable Housing Week. And then to take it a little step further, we're thinking of the city sponsoring some sort of event that week. Maybe we have a panel come and talk about affordable housing issues. Maybe somebody from the research community, somebody from development side, and somebody from advocacy, where we have a panel and have a community discussion about affordable housing. The timing will be good because it'll be soon after you adopt the direction you want to go on these housing strategies we've been talking about. So it's something we're thinking of. We've got a little time, so if you come up with any ideas or anything you'd like to see during Affordable Housing Week, let us know. And Brian, do you mind giving an update on a couple of items? Mary's Place and KGM 520 Bridge demolition?
In that order?
You can choose. And Nancy Owsley, do you have any fun and exciting news you want to share? All right, so we'll save that. We'll save that for last.
Save that for last. I do have some exciting news, though. We received a pre-application for Mary's Place. Mary's Place is a homeless shelter for people with kids that don't have families, and they're looking to use the old King County Sheriff's Precinct building as a shelter. And so we have put together some preliminary comments for our pre-application meeting, which is tomorrow morning. And what it's looking like right now is that planning-wise and engineering-wise, it looks like it's going to be okay. We were thinking about early on that it might require a development agreement or some other possible avenue to go down. But unfortunately, we are having a little bit of difficulties or complications in the fire and building codes. Because as you guys know, everything in our city, well, not just our city, statewide, that has multifamily living in it requires fire sprinklers. And the Sheriff's Precinct building doesn't currently have any fire suppression sprinkler systems. So we are meeting with Mary's Place tomorrow, the fire marshal and our review team, and we need to sit down and figure out some good mitigation measures that will satisfy us and the fire marshal to allow Mary's Place to utilize the precinct building as a shelter.
So City of Seattle Fire Department Fire Marshal was comfortable with mitigations that were made at the Mary's Place in North Seattle. Our fire marshal is aware of those mitigations and may or may not be comfortable with those. Brian's going to spend a little more time with them, but just in summary, fire sprinklers are required unless you can provide offsetting mitigations, whether it's more exits or having staff stay awake at night in case there is a fire. Because the problem is with sleeping quarters, you're asleep, and so you can't tell that a fire is happening. But if Mary's Place is going to be staffed with people 24/7 and they're staying awake, that can be a potential mitigation for not having sprinklers. So those are some things that we just need to talk through and hopefully have our fire marshal become comfortable with.
Any questions on Mary's Place?
Councilman Nigel?
I mean, I would argue that it's safer for those families to be living inside rather than, even if they don't have the sprinklers they need, rather than out on the streets. But that's just me looking at it from a purely safety standpoint, not a fire safety standpoint. If the issue is that there needs to be somebody awake or something like that, could they just install more smoke detectors or something like that to mitigate? I mean, they don't sleep unless you don't change the battery every 6 months, but is that a possibility?
Yeah, another possibility could be a fire alarm system. And I know that the building does have a fire alarm system, but I'm not sure the the condition that it's in or the brand that it is, but that's one thing that the fire marshal wants to look at and get more comfortable with. But sure, those are good examples of mitigations that could be provided.
I'd also point out they're directly across the street from the fire station, so they're about as safe as you're going to get physically. They could run across. They could run hoses across the street and put out a fire there. So I appreciate the work you're putting into this. I think it's important we find a way through this and make it work out for them. So thank you, Brian.
Okay, moving on to KGM and the Lake Point site. We were informed last Friday that they are completely done transporting rubblized concrete through the city of Kenmore and the Lake Point site. And now they're just demobilizing to get everything off the site. They should be off by the end of this month. That was the latest that I heard.
In the meantime, we're still going to send WashDOT a letter saying, number one, we have a CSDP extension agreement for Lake Point that says that as long as that CSDP, or the Commercial Site Development Plan, is alive, that property owner and developer agree not to allow rest of the west work to occur there. Rest of the west work has to do with the next phase of the 520 bridge. So we're going to say that in that letter, but we're also going to say even if that CSDP extension agreement wasn't in effect and they hadn't agreed to not allow it, that there's other things that are going to make it very difficult, including land use issues, for you to even think about doing rest of the west work there.
Sure. Will that letter then address the non-conforming land use and the expiration of that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, all right, and then I think Nancy Owsley has some fun stuff.
You know, I'm all about the fun. And a couple of things, though, before I get into the one truly fun item, is that we had some really good press coverage over the last week or so, and we're really pleased with the work that our media relations consultants from Gallatin are doing. So you probably saw the item in the Seattle Times about the hangar and the retail tenant. So that they were really instrumental in getting that story put together. And then King 5 did a story on frontier franchise enforcement, too. And a local resident agreed to be interviewed, Sasha Phillip. And I was out of state, but I looked at it online, and I think it turned out really well, too. So good work being done on that. So the fun thing is, Derek has met this family. One of the very coolest families I've met in Kenmore since I've worked here is the Borromeo family. They've lived in Kenmore for decades, multiple generations, and Alex Borromeo and his son and nephew have been incubator tenants for a while now, and more recently they've been involved in the business training that is funded by the Port of Seattle with another business. Alex calls himself a serial entrepreneur, and so he is starting a business with one of his daughters. And so they've been involved in that training. Well, one of their other daughters is in the TV program The Voice, and she's doing extremely well in it. And she's going to be in town later this month, and so we may be able to have her participate in some kind of an event.
Maybe sing to us? Can she sing to us?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I was just emailing about her schedule, and so we just learned about this today, so we're going to see if we can put something together. But I saw a little clip on the web from the most recent program, And there was her whole family. There was her mom and her dad and siblings backstage when she was performing. So this is a great Kenmore story.
And to add to that, didn't Alex's son win the national or the world paintballing championship a couple years ago?
He's very good. He's very good.
Yeah, and he won it in Japan, I think, or somewhere. Yeah.
And you, council met him, well, a year or so ago when we did an incubator briefing, too. So they live not far from the Van Nesses. So stay tuned.
Can I add one more fun thing? So tomorrow is March 14th, 3.14. And what's the rest, Chris? It goes on forever. But yeah, pi as in P-I. So it's National Pie Day tomorrow. And we have coworkers, people in our organization that use PI on a semi-regular basis. And so in honor of them, we're going to serve pie, P-I-E, at 3 o'clock tomorrow. My wife, Michelle, went to Costco today and got a bunch of pies. And so anyway, if you
do they have to wait till 3:14?
Oh, good idea. Oh, I didn't think of that.
Delayed gratification.
Okay, at 3:14 p.m. tomorrow, we're going to serve PIE for PI people. But you're welcome to come if you'd like. It'll be here in the community room. That's all I have.
All right, that wraps up staff report. Moving to council member reports and comments, and we'll start with Councilmember Danuski.
Nothing extra for me.
Councilmember Herbrick.
Nothing to add.
And Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, actually, tomorrow is also another very special day because it's my wife's birthday. So now that I've been informed of this, I might have a birthday pie instead of a cake. And so this is good to know. And also, I'd like to say I read your write-up on the conclusion for the plussing session, and I knew you had a hand in it when it actually mentioned Hoven rings. And it was like, where did this come from? So good job, Rob.
All right. I think we are done with our business, and I was talking to some honorary council members who came up and learned that this is a gavel, not a hammer. Would one of you like to come up and end our meeting by tapping the gavel on the block of wood? No. Okay. Our honorary council members would like me to do it. Business over adjourned.